It's been 3 years since notorious child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein died in prison.
Well, he's dead, so...
While the relationship between Epstein and high-profile business juggernauts like Bill Gates have been lightly touched on in the media, their relationship has largely been kept under the radar. According to the mainstream media, which has been running cover for the insidious and frightening relationship, the two only met a few times for dinner. And according to Gates, he only met with Epstein because he was under the impression that Epstein could help him with global health projects.
He had relationships with people he said, would give to global health, which is a interest I have.
More problematic facts on rare occasion have bubbled up to the surface of mainstream media reports. For example, the New York Times was leaked Bill Gates' emails from after a meeting with Epstein. In it, it's revealed that the meeting had little to do with global health, but instead with, quote, very attractive women. In an email to his colleague, while still married to his wife Melinda, Gates wrote that he was at Epstein's mansion, quote, quite late because a, quote, very attractive Swedish woman and her daughter dropped by. Whitney Webb is an independent investigative journalist. She just published a 2-volume, 900-page series on Epstein that goes back several decades into history. At a seminar where Webb was giving a lecture on the state of journalism, she sat down with me to discuss the Gates-Epstein relationship, which runs much deeper and started years, perhaps even decades before Gates or the mainstream media lets on.
Okay, well, it definitely goes really deep, I would say. I'll give you an example that was a starting point for me and a lot of the stuff I wrote about, particularly on Epstein and Bill Gates. In 2001, the Evening Standard, mainstream media, UK outlet, reported on Jeffrey Epstein in the context of his relationship with Prince Andrew, and it was explaining who Jeffrey Epstein was, and it said Jeffrey Epstein made his money, his millions, because of his business links to 3 people: Leslie Wexner, all know about Epstein and Leslie Wexner, Donald Trump, know about that relationship, but the third one is Bill Gates. So why does this mainstream media article that was never retracted, Bill Gates never sued at the time or anything like that, say that Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates had business links in 2001? That would imply that they had significant business ties going back to the 1990s. And it turns out that Isabel Maxwell, who's Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, who, as I've written in a lot of my past work and also in the book, is pretty intelligence linked as well, appears in an interview in The Guardian, another UK media outlet, in 2000, talking about Bill Gates in literally the weirdest terms I've probably ever seen. And Isabel Maxwell has done dozens of interviews over the years, but she's quoted when she talks about Bill Gates specifically in this article as speaking in a faux Southern accent and purring when she talks about Bill Gates and how she basically convinced him to donate money to certain causes and stuff when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had just sort of begun. And, it's very odd. And then if you look at the company she was running at the time, which was linked up with Israeli intelligence, it was called ComTouch. That company was going to collapse, essentially, was having a lot of problems with its IPO, and the people that come in to rescue it are the 2 Microsoft co-founders, Bill Gates and Paul Allen. And they dumped money into a company that was, the only thing it really had going for it were intelligence links. It was unprofitable, it was losing tons of money, struggling with major debt loads, its IPO, value was hemorrhaging, really, and then these guys step in and are propping up this company for some reason. Why are they helping out the Maxwell family? Another example is a lady named Melanie Walker, who Jeffrey Epstein allegedly met in the early 90s, offered her a Victoria's Secret modeling job. It's unclear if she ever took it, but she became his science advisor around 1999 or so. And just a few years later, well before the official date that Epstein and Gates met, which is 2011 per mainstream media, I think around 2003, 2004, becomes one of the top science advisors to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So essentially, this lady, Melanie Walker, her CV at that point, her resume when she's going to apply for this, very influential job at the Gates Foundation, is being Jeffrey Epstein's science advisor. Well, Bill and Melinda Gates would have had to have known who Jeffrey Epstein was and what science he was into, right? So, there's a lot of unanswered questions there, and of course there's a lot that hasn't been explored with, for one of Bill Gates' other top science advisors, Boris Nikolic. He was named an executor of Epstein's estate after his death, and he tried to, step away from that, but obviously, Jeffrey Epstein saw some sort of connection there, and they were actually introduced to each other by Melanie Walker. So there's a lot of unexplored territory there, to say the very least, and there's numerous indications beyond what we've talking about already about Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein having known each other well before the acknowledged 2011 date.
In an era where everyone is being pressured into and told to trust the science, it's always important to highlight where the science is getting its money from. Epstein funded dozens of scientists and elite research institutions, and the relationship was reciprocal. Epstein actually had his own office, keycard, and phone line at Harvard University. But what kind of science was Epstein actually interested in?
Well, I would basically categorize it as sort of transhumanist, and this is even acknowledged by the New York Times, The Guardian. I mean, major mainstream media outlets refer to him as being interested in eugenics and transhumanism explicitly. And if you look at Melanie Walker again, to use her as an example, she right now is with the Rockefeller Foundation, and a couple years ago wrote an article for the World Economic Forum about the promise of brain-machine interfaces, which is pretty obviously a transhumanist technology. You're combining man and machine at the neurological level. And she's a major proponent of that type of technology, and obviously Epstein was very into that as well. He was a big donor to what was once the World Transhumanist Association, now known as Humanity Plus, and had courted a lot of scientists at very high-powered institutions, a lot of them geneticists at Harvard or MIT, and had openly talked about trying to get some of them to help him basically create a selective breeding program at his New Mexico property. All sorts of weird science there, to say the very least, but not necessarily weird to people like Bill Gates, right? So, it's definitely a bit complicated, the whole science aspect, and especially as it relates to Epstein's New Mexico property. Some people have claimed that those types of projects did move forward there, but unfortunately, I couldn't corroborate that. But there was no interest in investigating that by the federal government. Jeffrey Epstein's New York property was raided right away. They waited almost a month to go raid the islands, but they never touched the New Mexico property. Why is that?
Webb explained to me that the Epstein network is just as much a financial crimes network as a sex crimes network, and that the network did not begin with Epstein, just as it doesn't end with him.
So I would say it still exists, but it obviously has evolved a lot since its origins. Where I start off the book is somewhere in the 1940s or so, and it's basically about how organized crime and intelligence sort of developed a symbiotic relationship over time. But this also, over time also began to include corporate America, and you have a lot of different players mixed together. You have sort of offshoots from U.S. intelligence or Israeli intelligence that are sort of function like a private CIA. Or private intelligence agency that's not necessarily beholden to anyone, and they're working for certain specific oligarchs or for a specific agenda. So over time it evolves and it gets pretty complicated. But yeah, the narrative that Jeffrey Epstein is, the issues with him died with him is, completely false in my opinion. I would say that someone like Jeffrey Epstein was really middle management for this particular organization, this group, which, I should point out is probably pretty decentralized, but they have this symbiosis going between them that, makes them money. And in my experience looking at Epstein, he was more, just as much a financial criminal as a sex criminal, and there's people that profited alongside him for those financial crimes, right? So, it wasn't just his sex crimes that were being enabled for so long, it was his financial crimes as well, and you don't do that without a support system. So what I'm trying to show in the books is that support system and show how it existed well before Epstein, and how Epstein's death doesn't change that situation. It continues, operating essentially the same, really. Maybe people like Bill Gates or other people known to be connected to him, Leslie Wexner, have had some hiccups in their public relations, their public images, but they have, teams and teams of PR people working on managing their image all the time, so it's really irrelevant for them, and they haven't stopped what they're doing, right? So, I think it definitely continues well beyond Epstein. They want us to think it died with him. The narrative is, oh, he's the one naughty billionaire, he's dead, he's gone, everything's fine now.
Well, he's dead, so.
And obviously, look around you. It's, there's a lot still going on that's very problematic.
If you want to continue seeing the other side of the story, not the government narrative or the corporate media narrative, head to rebelnewsusa.com.